Who founded the mountains of Moria? What is their history throughout the ages? What kings rose and fell, and what alliances did they forge? The mines are given different names. I've chosen to use the name Moria throughout this text. Spoilers for the Lord of the Rings books as well throughout. Aule, in his eagerness for the elves to arise, created the Dwarves. Aule was one of the Ainur spirits created by the first god Eru. Aule had skill in smithcraft, and he created 7 dwarves. Durin is one of them, and the eldest. He is also the one ancestor shared by all dwarven kings. Durin came to the east of the Misty Mountains, and afterwards that place was called the Mines of Moria. He lived for so long, he gained the name Durin the Deathless. When he did finally pass away, his tomb was in Moria, and his line carried on, as did the name Durin. For a second they saw a vast roof, far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars, hewn of stone. Before them and on either side stretched a huge empty hall, its black walls polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight before them eastwards, and one on either side. In Moria the dwarves' wealth grew on the mithril mined from within the depths of Moria, and the dwarves kept links to the other clans, and began trading with men when they arrived, to great profits on either side. As the First Age ended, there was great wealth in Moria, rich in law, craft and people. Some of these people came from the cities in the Blue Mountains. Those cities had been broken during Thangorodrim. This was when Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, raised 3 fiery mountains and the cities were wasted. So there would have been a mix of dwarf clans inside Moria's walls, as the refugees made the hard choice of leaving their homeland and travelling there. The Orcs was still a threat, but thankfully, through the dwarves' alliance with men, they could fight the Orcs in a new way and crush them between the heavy dwarven infantry of Moria and the horsed archers provided by men. Afterwards, men and dwarves brought order to the land they had secured together. An elven realm was established to the west of Moria. It was called Eregion, creating friendly relations between elves and dwarves. Through this link came the sharing of craft, and the elves increased the beauty of Moria through their own skill. This friendship also reaped further reward in the expansion of Moria westwards. This ended at the West Gate. It bordered with Eregion and was chiefly used by the elves. The lord of that region, Celebrimor, used elven lettering on the gate. It was built by Narvi, with whom the lord was friends. The wording on the gate read, "I Narvi made them. Celebrimor of Eregion drew these signs." The West Gate also allowed Galadriel and her fellow elves to pass through and establish Lothlorien. Moria at this time had several levels. The upper level lit with crystal lamps or windows, and below that deeps containing many chambers and halls, and below that mines and treasuries, and below the mines ancient tunnels of the earth, in darkness since the creation of the world, where nameless things gnawed. A key design in Moria was Durin's Bridge. At the end of the hall, the floor vanished and fell to an unknown depth. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defence of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and the outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. The war between the elves and Sauron hit Eregion, and it was destroyed. Elrond led forces who, with the survivors of the fallen city, were going to be overwhelmed. But the dwarven king, Durin III, sent an army that attacked the host of Sauron from the rear, and this relief of pressure allowed the elves to escape. The dwarves after returned to their city and closed the gate. The mines endured despite the dominion of Sauron. The people found protection in their numbers and the deep halls of Moria. In the Third Age, Durin, the sixth to have that name, was king. At the time, all evil things were stirring, and the dwarves looked deep within their mountain to find more mithril. It was becoming harder to find, and they roused from sleep a thing of terror. Durin was killed by it, and later his son Nain, and because of the fear, for their lives in the face of the balrog, the glory of Moria faded. Its people were destroyed or fled. The host of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, had many balrog within it, and when it was defeated by the host of the West, they fled away into the dark. I can only assume one of those places was the deep and silent places of Moria. Those that escaped moved north, and Thrain, son of the fallen dwarven king Nain, found Erebor, the lonely mountain, and became king under the mountain, and delving deep, found the Arkenstone. Later, knowing of its riches, the dragon Smaug attacked Erebor. Those that escaped included King Thror and his son Thrain II. One of Thrain's sons was called Thorin, later to take the surname of Oakenshield. Without his riches, Thror gave away the one great treasure he still held, the last of the 7 dwarven rings, and told Thrain it was possibly the foundation for new gold. Years later, Thror and his friend Na came to Moria. Thror was slightly crazed, partly through his poor fortunes and possibly by the ring. He now no longer owned it, but the taint stayed with him, as now, with its master Sauron awake and abroad in the world, the ring might have passed its magical corruption to Thror. The gate of Moria was open. Thror walked inside. Despite warnings from Na, he did not come back. Now waited for days. Eventually, his patience was rewarded. He heard a shout and then a horn, and a body was thrown out onto the steps. Could it be Thror? Na moved closer, and a voice came to his ears from in the gate, saying he could be their messenger. Closer still, Na saw it was Thror. His head had been taken off. He heard laughter and saw the orc inside the gate. The orc gave a warning that other dwarves that entered would meet the same fate. The orc also said he had written his name on the head of Thror, and that he was king in Moria. That name was Azog, but not that one. A bag of coins was thrown for Na to deliver the message, and he fled after seeing the body being hacked and fed to the crows of his friend Thror. This started a long-running war between the orcs and the dwarves. Messages went out, and the dwarves mustered their strength and took one by one the orc strongholds. They hunted Azog, and at last the fleeing orcs were all gathered in Moria, and the dwarven host came. The dwarves gave a shout on seeing the gate of the ancient home on the hillside. A great many orcs faced them on the slopes, and also poured out of the gates of Moria. Azog had plotted to hold their numbers back until this moment. The day was dark, and so the orcs did not waver in their favoured environment. They also had larger numbers and held the high ground. Thrain led the first vanguard, but was thrown back and took losses, and Thrain was driven into the wooded trees. Back at the battle, it swayed back and forth in violent slaughter, until the dwarves began to take the day. Nain, son of Gror, came with mailed warriors and drove through the orcs unto the threshold of Moria. The name Azog was cried out twice, as they hewed down with their mattocks all who stood in their way. To give you a little context at this moment, Nain was a dwarven king from the Iron Hills, and mattock is a tool for digging and chopping. Nain then called out Azog. He was strong and agile. He also came with guards, and they engaged those with Nain. The dwarf was weak with battle and bent in fury, but Azog was fresh. Azog darted aside and kicked Nain's leg, so that the mattock splintered on the stone where he had stood. But Nain stumbled forward. Then Azog, with a swift swing, hewed his neck. His mail collar withstood the edge, but so heavy was the blow that Nain's neck was broken and he fell. Then Azog laughed, and he lifted up his head to let forth a great yell of triumph, but the cry died in his throat. Azog's army was routed by the dwarves, so he fled inside. Up the steps after him leapt a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dane Ironfoot, Nuin's son. Right before the doors he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head. Dane Ironfoot was now Lord of the Dwarves of the Iron Hills in the Wilderland, so the Dwarves finally gained revenge for the savage death of Thror. They took the head of Azog and thrust into its mouth the purse of small money, and then they set it on a stake. But no feast nor song was there that night, for their dead were beyond the count of grief. Barely half of their number, it is said, could still stand or had hope of healing. Thrain proclaimed to the dwarves that Moria was now theirs. Many disagreed, pleading vengeance as their motivation. Then Thrain turned to Dane and said, "But surely my own king will not desert me." "No," said Dane, "you are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you, and will again, but we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow it waits for you still, Durins' bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria." Thrain and Thorin then returned to Dunland and the Forge, and later Gandalf the Grey entered Moria for the first time while searching for Thrain II, who had disappeared whilst going to the Lonely Mountain. In 2989, the dwarven folk of the Lonely Mountain wanted to recolonise Moria, the home of their ancestors. This was led by Balin. His father Fundin had been in the company of dwarves that had recovered the home of Erebor from the dragon, and perhaps he wanted to accomplish something similar here. They fought and slew many orcs and found treasures left by their ancestors. But still there was the balrog, and the orcs proved too strong, and all were slain. We cannot get out. The end comes, and then drums in the deep. Later, Gandalf was forced to lead the Fellowship of the Ring through Moria, and Gandalf stood before the balrog, and they fought, and he smote the ruin of the balrog atop a mountain, fulfilling what Dane had said, that the world must change for the balrog to fall, for dwarves to return. After the War of the Ring and the final defeat of Sauron, the exiled dwarves of Moria wanted to return to their home, and with the slaying of the balrog they could at last reclaim it. Thorin, the third Stonehelm, led such a party to reclaim the past that had been taken from them by the balrog. Now, listener, what do you think of Tolkien's tale of Moria, of the rise and fall of the folk of Durin? Please comment below. Thank you for checking out my video. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell for all notifications.